Let me just double check the audio.
Let me know if you need me to say anything.
That works.
Excellent.
I did, and you did, and cool, we're live. All right, so let's just get into it. It's been a real busy week. We have essentially no
Yes.
agenda, so we're going to be completely off the cuff today and probably keep it short. There was a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. We are also short a co-host this week, which wasn't too last minute, but I was too busy to adjust our slide here. So it's just going to be our relatively small faces on the side of the screen with a blank spot in the middle. Ian will be back next week.
Yep.
So Phill, you had a short correction you wanted to make.
Yes. Last week, in a video that is unlisted and a stream that I don't recall how many people were there, but it doesn't matter because my ethics demand that I make this correction. We mentioned that the Justin's House of Bourbon folks got into trouble with the Kentucky ABC folks and the ATF, and that they had been accused of counterfeiting, and they have been cleared of all charges of counterfeiting. There is apparently still some partially pending investigation, but for the most part, they've been cleared. They've been handed down to $1,500 fines for record keeping violations. But that made me curious about some of the things that I had read. So I went back and looked, and specifically at two articles that I know that I read because I still had them saved on my other computer. I don't feel inclined to give them any more attention because on reread, it's pretty clear that they either didn't do their research or were intentionally misleading. Um, one of which had some like very definite leading language regarding how much Blanton's Justin's House of Bourbon sold, and then a very specific number for the projected estimate of how many of a certain specific label of Blanton's was produced in a year by Buffalo Trace, and it was clear that they were conflating that number with the total number of bottles of Blanton that Justin's House of Bourbon sold, with no time frame indicated on that or a specific label indication. And I'd like to say for the record that that is my bad, that if I had done more research, I probably would have seen more correct facts. And I would like to apologize to them. So I'm sorry about that.
Well, all good. Your statement is now on the record, and we may edit it into the other stream if we get that edited down.
Yeah,
And hopefully you're still hearing me because my computer froze.
I can still hear you. Um, I don't know if the stream can.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just check. Yeah, seems good still. Okay. Uh, Phill, would you do me a favor, actually? Could you turn up the gain on your mic by like about 10%?
This is about as high as I feel comfortable going.
You're clipping a little now. If you could back it off just a little from there.
How is this?
Good, I think.
All right, I'm looking at the ring and it's not popping into the yellow as much.
Okay. I think the other problem is I had my headphones turned down too much, so I thought you were quieter than you are. Give me another quick test.
How about now?
Turn it down just a little. You're in the red.
All right,
Perfect.
okay. So,
Yeah, great. Thanks.
uh, and with that out of the way, um, uh, I'm not sure what you wanted to talk about, but I did notice today that Method of Madness just released or is about to release a Gariana Oak bottling, which is very cool. Um,
Yeah, I learned some interesting things maybe about Garyana Oak. And I'm gonna go ahead and say that I probably shouldn't repeat because I was getting some industry inside baseball. Um,
yeah,
but suffice it to say, Garyana Oak demand seems to be going up, which
yes,
is a very interesting development given that Garyana Oak is, at least in Washington, endangered, and you can only use it if it's already fallen wood, which means that we talked about this last time, I think, which means
Yes.
that barrels made from Gariana oak are exceedingly rare in terms of the industry's
Hmm.
the amount of oak circulating throughout the industry. And
And very expensive.
yes, and seeing additional demand for it does raise concerns about the brands we know and love that are already using it.
Yes. Um, and I've, from the perspective of someone who knows a little bit about woodworking and has worked with red oak and white oak, it is probably pretty um, uh, good wood for building with, given that white oak and red oak are both, great for woodworking purposes for making furniture and the like. And what is a barrel if not a piece of very specific furniture, right?
That is one way of looking at it for sure.
Um, the other thing is about uh, the demand for Quercus cariana increasing is it makes me hopeful that there will be some efforts in planting some Gary oak for the purposes of avoiding, you know, uh, it would be an investment for, you know, probably decades down the road because, it'd probably take at least 15, 20 years for the trees to get big enough to be usable. Um, but if if people start planning now, uh, then you know that might help stave off some of the panic in a few years when the demand has grown and people are starting to look at the supply with furrowed brow.
Yeah, I guess I have nothing else to add other than on the note of wood management, uh, I'm always going to take an opportunity to plug American single malt. American single malt is going to be one of the fastest growing and biggest categories of American whiskey that uses
Mhm.
not necessarily new oak.
Right.
Of course, a lot of producers will probably continue using new oak because American single malt
That is how.
whiskey can be also malt whiskey. So producers that are hedging their bets on what American single malt whiskey will be probably did it by doing a malt whiskey. A lot of producers are going to do it because that's the American way. A lot of producers are
Mhm.
going to do it because they think that's the best for flavor. Um, but there is at least room for refilled oak in the industry. And if I recall correctly, I believe I've seen some news to the effect that uh, other American whiskey categories may consider adding an allowance for refilled oak because of the wood shortage issue.
Yeah.
But that would be
I
very early talk of such a thing because changing the
yeah.
identity of something like bourbon is going to be a real hard battle.
And so much of what American Spirit is actually flavor extraction from the charred oak barrels rather than shining a light on the spirit of the grain. Um, which sounds weird to say because some of the most defining characteristics of the whiskey is the grain used, but you get wildly different results, between a refill barrel and a new barrel with the same mash bill, and a lot of the flavors that are uh, sort of linked with bourbon and American rye and so on are from those brand new charred oak barrels.
Sorry, just checking on my computer
Yep.
freezing issue. Yeah, I don't know what's going on today. Computer seems real busy. I think I'm doing the normal amount of things with OBS, so I'm not quite sure. Um, Here, let me kill some other programs. And
Well,
I am sorry if I could. You actually have a little bit of a buzz coming through on your mic now, which sounds like
oh,
possibly a loose cable, or maybe you want to back that gain back off to where you had it. and I can adjust your volume in Discord.
Well, let me yeah, I'm hearing that on the direct monitoring.
One of these days, we will figure out audio before we go live and have no issues. Also, I bought a new microphone and
Ooh, what'd you
have not
get?
set it up yet. I got the Shure MV7, the most popular podcast mic. It has the advantage of having either the audio interface approach or a USB
Yeah,
based approach. And the USB is just going to let me get my set up off the ground a lot faster without having to nitpick with lots of different pieces of hardware I've never used before. So one piece of hardware at a time. So
yep,
I have the Shure mic and an arm, an adjustable arm for the mic, so that I can put it where I want it.
excellent.
That seems like a real
So,
good place to start. But I did not set it
I've
up.
solved the buzz issue.
Yes, it sounds a lot better. Thank you.
Would you like to know what it was so that you can
Sure,
laugh at me?
sure.
I had my phone sitting on top of the cloud lifter.
Nice, 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 nice. Yeah, it kind of did resemble the sound of the old whenever an edge call was coming in. It goes dit, 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 dit,
Yeah,
dit.
yeah. So, note to self, don't do that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's actually really funny. And if I ever do get a cloud lifter, which I might, because Shure MV7 seems the Shure microphones seem to being what is it, dynamic or passive microphones?
uh
Dynamic, I think is the term.
Dynamic is usually what you want a cloud lifter for.
Yeah, so you use a cloud lifter. So I learned last week or the week before. Um, yeah, we're
So,
targeting this is a podcast. We happen to be streaming video, but really we're aiming for audio quality, and we are trying to get everybody up to scratch. Mostly me because I'm short of the hardware compared to my other hosts.
I mean, I am in the fortunate position of I can be a bit of a gear hound and buy stuff. So,
That is true.
um, I've went ahead and poured myself because I can and because I had them sitting here a little bit of the regular larceny small batch and some of the ragged branch weeded bourbon, which I only have a
Nice.
little tiny little bottle of. But
Weeded bourbon. Speaking of which, Um,
ooh,
I hadn't decided what I was going to have tonight, but I have really been enjoying in this hot weather. Maker's Mark 46 is going real well for me. So I think to keep today uncomplicated, I will stick with an
mhm.
old favorite. So we
So
have here the Maker's Mark 46.
Larceny is one that I sort of always keep on hand. Um, one of my friends, sort of, he has two modes for bourbon. He likes Knob Creek and he likes Larceny. So I keep a bottle of Larceny and a bottle of Knob Creek. Except I just dropped my phone into my recycling bin. Uh, except I'm out of the regular Knob Creek at the moment because I drank it all.
Fair enough. And by the way, I have water in my mug today.
I need to get better about drinking water.
Yeah, I gave blood this past weekend. And one of the things they say, I also have an athletic competition coming up on Saturday.
Mhm.
So I am trying my best to recover as quickly as possible, which means lots of iron. So I'm going hard on the spinach, V8, vitamin supplements. And they also say drink an extra liter of water or something. They said an extra two, or what was it, extra 4 cups of water? Basically a
Mhm.
liter, 32 ounces. Yeah. Drink an extra liter of water a day for a while, and I forget how long they said, but like I'm real good at drinking extra water, and I love drinking water. So
Uh, m- for whatever reason, our tap water has developed an interesting off flavor that I can't quite put my finger on, but I don't like that very much.
hmm. That happened to me
And I'm
sometimes in the last place that I lived. Hail hydrate, says David in the chat.
careful, careful.
I I didn't get that joke at first. Well done.
So, interestingly, sort of, I've I've been on a kick on craft whiskey, and I forgot that I had a little mini bottle of the standard Ragged Branch signature and a little mini bottle of the weeded, um, which is interesting because I've never actually seen a bottle of the uh, weeded from Ragged Branch, like a full sized bottle, like everything is a disaster. But I'm I'm a big fan of theirs now. I guess they make good stuff.
Nice. By the way, I am trying to exercise my video call slash interview skills and say I'm going to try my best not to interrupt with like little affirmative interjections because we have had the issue on this podcast that our call sometimes gets the audio out of sync.
Mm.
And it is best if
Hmm.
I don't appear to be interrupting you so that you can keep on talking. And I think we can probably have that go both ways. Because we can always cut dead air in post. And it's better for us not to have crosstalk, I think.
That sounds reasonable to me.
At the moment, though, I think our audio is well in sync, which is a good thing. Um, so I think my rough agenda for today is I want to talk about a couple of interesting conversations that have come up in the Whiskey Lodge this past week. Um, Actually, before I do that, I just want to double check. How is my audio coming through loudly enough for you? Because I think my levels are a little low today for some reason.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay. I'll pass the same question to chat. Am I loud enough? Let me know if not. I'll see what I can do. Okay, so conversation number one that happened in, I think it was the Whiskey Lodge, or maybe I was just having this conversation somewhere else. Um, Consider the cost of a bottle of whiskey.
Yes.
I'm gonna soapbox maybe a little bit, but feel free to interject if you have something to add. First of all, I think most people would consider it pretty reasonable to pay $20 for an okay bottle of wine. You may pay a little bit less, you may pay a little bit more, but for people who aren't wine drinkers, you probably feel okay with paying around $20 for a decent bottle of wine. By the same token, most people who buy whiskey, myself included, before I got into exploring and getting a collection of my own and really thinking about what I'm willing to pay for what quality, um, I also found myself, perhaps paradoxically, trying to keep my whiskey bottles under about $30. Now, consider how much usage you get out of a bottle of whiskey versus a bottle of wine, not to mention the fact that it keeps a lot longer. We can get back to that. But if you just count number of servings, you're going to get probably 4 times as many servings out of a bottle of whiskey, maybe 3 to 4 times, right? A bottle of wine, typically 3.5 glasses or 4 glasses of wine, depending on whether you pour real full glasses. Um, in my case, I usually pour about half a glass of wine, but I also tend to pour about half a serving of whiskey. So, sort of by the same token, I get about the same additional utility out of a bottle of whiskey. Um, so, by that math, if you get 3 or 4 times as much utility out of a bottle of whiskey, whether you're making cocktails, drinking on the rocks, drinking neat, whatever, however it is that you're enjoying that, you're getting about 3 to 4 times the amount of utility out of a bottle of whiskey compared to a bottle of wine. Considering all that, the $20 for a bottle of wine and the extra utility of a bottle of whiskey, why is it that we generally don't tend to think of whiskey as something we should spend 3 to 4 times as much on?
That's interesting because I've found myself in the camp of my what I'm comfortable in spending on a bottle of whiskey translates to what when I'm buying a bottle of wine for a friend, what I'm willing to spend on that. Um, which has resulted in me handing someone a $55, $60 bottle of wine and getting a what in response. Um, because that's sort of where I feel comfortable price wise at a pretty good bottle of whiskey.
That's
Kind
interesting
of
that you actually went the other way on that because I was going to say, as far as the gift scenario goes, it's real easy to bring someone a bottle of wine. The question is, what do you pay for it? Um, if you're
right.
not a wine expert, are you going to pay a lot more for a bottle of wine? This question actually came up in a different friend group, where someone was like, I want to bring a wine enthusiast a really, really nice bottle of wine. Who knows anything about wine that can help me make a good choice here, right? And that's sort of, I feel personally, like I get that gesture, that was a very nice gesture and all. My personal comfort level with this would be if I know that I'm going to bring an enthusiast of a topic a gift, I'm going to be more likely to try to get them something unique rather than the best possible thing because I don't know
Right.
their tastes. But everybody always appreciates novelty, right? I personally think the best gift you can give somebody is something they would never buy for themselves, that they're likely to enjoy on some dimension, right? My friends that want to buy me whiskey, for instance, buy me like spicy flavored whiskey. So they most recently got me a bottle of the Tabasco Barrel Dickel, which I thought was hilarious, and I made them all do a shot with me because what else are you going to do? Um, and I actually thought that was a great gift, right? What do you get for a
Yeah.
whiskey enthusiast? You buy them something they would not buy for themselves. That's my personal take on that. But again, the price of a gift is an interesting angle. If you're willing to spend $60 on a gift and the choice is wine or whiskey, you can maybe get a better wine for that $60, and maybe your friend likes wine better.
Right. And sort of my, I approach wine from the perspective of I'm coming to it as a whiskey drinker. So my understanding of like, the threshold for what is a, tier level like, high mid tier whiskey price. Okay, that probably translates to wine, right? And it sort of it doesn't really. And it's one of those like, it never occurred to me that 55, $60 is a lot for a single bottle of wine because like yeah, you can go down to the convenience shop down the street and buy, a $5 bottle of wine, but I view that in the same way that you can go buy a liter of Old Crow for $10. So, you know, I don't know where you want to, where each person draws the lines in prices and and in terms of merit. And like I'm big on craft. Craft whiskey is sort of something that I've got a keen interest in because there are a lot of people doing interesting things and there is a price premium on that. For example, I think this is a 40 45-ish dollar bottle of bourbon from Reverend Distilling. They made some awful choices on R.D. Wilhelm Distilling Company, Reverend Bourbon. They made some awful choices on the rear label. There's a clear sticker with writing right here
Hmm.
that is, or right here, that is impossible to read. Um, Bottled at 43%, that's 86 proof, and it's okay. It's a little bit young, but it's not bad. Um, but that's, $10 more than I'd pay for the same whiskey from a bigger producer. And I'm happy paying that difference because it's craft. Whereas, like, if say Beam bottled that and tried to sell it at the same price, I'd laugh at them because I'm not buying that. I learned my lesson from the Basil Haydens. Um,
Yeah, I was
but
going to say, what
also,
if it was something else from Beam Suntory, a different brand with a more premium?
right, but like, I mean, and this cost less by about 5-ish bucks. I think I paid $35 for this. It's the single barrel. It's 108 proof, unfiltered for fuller flavor. And that's an interesting. Yeah, it's 108 proof. It's from a brand that everybody recognizes. It's okay. Um, but they can get away with pricing it that low because they've got the volume, and volume is part of the the way that some brands can price lower. Um, and I'm sure that translates to other spirits, but like the smaller the volume of output, the higher the price has to be to pay for all of the logistical things that have to be spread out amongst the product prices. But the fewer the prices, the higher the percentage of that logistical cost has to be put onto each individual bottle.
Absolutely. We touched on some of this actually when we did the flavor episode, um,
Right.
which yeah, there's a whole lot of places flavor come from. Some of those things are expensive. And sometimes you will be willing to pay extra for those things that are expensive, like the craft treatment of small batch distillation, the small farm to distillery type thing. Instead of the large economy of scale operation, you might be willing to pay more for the craft spirit, for instance, knowing that it's more expensive per unit for them to produce that. I completely agree, by the way. I think a lot of people will stop at flavor as for whether something is worth the price. I personally, some people think that the marketing story is just a story. Sometimes it is. The marketing story is just a story, and you shouldn't be paying extra for that. Sometimes it's a legitimate distillery philosophy where
Right.
if you want to support what they're doing genuinely, right, and they are in good faith doing that to make, in many cases, they are trying their best to keep costs down because keeping costs down means they can keep the price of the product down, which means they can sell more units, right? Everybody wants to do more business. So the customer and the business interest are aligned here, I think is probably safe to say.
Hmm.
And so when something is more expensive from a lot of producers, chances are there's a good reason for that, even if it's not necessarily reflected in flavor. And if you don't like something, by all means, don't buy it. If you like something and you like the story, and you know that for a craft distillery and it maybe tastes the same as, let's say it's on the same tier. Like, let's say you would rate something a 7 out of 10. By the way, we should get into rating scales at some point. But let's
Yeah.
say 5 out of 10 is like perfectly normal, right? Perfectly good. There's nothing wrong with it. There's also nothing great with it. And just to keep that idea of what a 5 out of 10 is, to say that something that is quite good, I'll use the word great for a 7 out of 10,
Hmm.
where it's got one or two things that really make it stand out and is really enjoyable. So like let's say you've got two things that are a 7 out of 10. One is from a distillery like, I don't know, Wild Turkey, and their
Right.
products are generally very reasonably priced. Even the rare breed cask strength you can get for under $50. Um, and by the same token, you might have something like Westward, which makes a completely different type of product, American single malt. They do a lot of cask finishing type of stuff. You would be paying $80, $90 for something that is about on the same enjoyment tier, right? But knowing they put a lot more emphasis on how they brew the beer that they end up distilling, and that they're a smaller operation, and anytime you involve a second barrel, price just goes right up right away, right?
Hmm.
There's a flavor profile you're paying extra for. There's also a story and an ethos you're paying extra for. And some of it, to be fair, is marketing. But you have to make that decision about whether you're willing to pay the price to support the type of product that you like, that you want to enjoy here. And again, you don't have to buy the products if you don't like it. But if you like it, if I'm choosing between two great things, I may or may not be looking at price depending on how special of a thing, or what kind of a gift I want to give, or what kind of profile the giftee is looking for, or what kind of profile I'm looking for to fill in my bar, my bar or my collection, or and so on and so on. Which actually that brings me to the point of Phill and I have rather large collections of whiskey that, let's just say we have more whiskey than we can responsibly drink in our lives. And we talked about
Yes.
how we would rather just give it away than let it languish on a shelf. Most consumers are not that way. they shouldn't be, I would like to take this opportunity to warn you against the curiosity bug that is going to have you buying dozens of bottles a year that you never finish.
Just just buy these, folks.
Get the minis,
If
go
you
to a
can,
bar.
yes, that's another good one.
Bars usually have pretty good selection, especially of the basics. There's don't do what I did in the first few months of when I wanted to get into reviewing whiskey, where I bought 4 bottles at a time of relatively cheap stuff, $10 to $20. Some of which was good, some of which was not so good, some of which is fine, but I'd rather be drinking something else. And these bottles languish on my shelf until I figure out something else to do with them. Infuse them with other flavors, put them in my barrel to age them longer, build a cocktail around them, bring them parties. Yep, you are doing a great job of demonstrating from stuff right next to you of things that I believe these are all things that you bought out of curiosity because they were relatively inexpensive.
Well, so it was well, I want to buy things and review them and, have because, so many people are like, "Oh, between these brands, what would you recommend?" And the answer is almost always, "Well, I haven't had that one." So I went about trying to have good notes on pretty much every basic to mid-level thing that I could get my hands on. And the result is that I have a pretty complete beam lineup. I think the only ones I'm missing are Choice and Bonded, which, you know, I mean, of the things that are labeled Beam. Uh, I don't have any Bookers. Um, and I think there are a
I do
handful,
have Bookers. I managed to find one.
but like I don't really touch those very often. Um, Especially since, for my when I was making cocktails online, I was primarily using Evan Williams Bottled and Bond as my go-to.
That is a
Because
fantastic one. Let's not spread that too
yes,
far around the internet.
okay, okay,
As we put it live on YouTube. Um, yeah, Evan Williams Bottled and Bond, huge step up from Evan Williams Black. Still under $20. You're paying maybe $2 more, and it is well worth it. It's great.
yes,
It's great in a cocktail. It's pretty good neat. You're gonna like it pretty much any way that you try it. Um, and it doesn't really have too much in the way of off notes. If you really
no,
dig, you can probably find some stuff that's not the best. It is still a budget whiskey, but they do an excellent
yeah,
job for that price point.
and it's at a good proof point too. 50% alcohol by volume means that it cuts through well in cocktails, and it doesn't get lost on the rocks, which, is a both are points that it has over most of the new budget bottles that I just pulled out of the cubby here.
Yep, most of that stuff under $20 you're finding for about 40% alcohol, maybe up to 45%, but probably not.
Yeah,
Evan Williams Bottled and Bond and Wild Turkey 101 are just about the only ones that get up that high to 100 proof, 101 proof. Those things that are just a touch higher are really good places to start a cocktail or put it on the rocks because they'll just last a little bit longer with the full-bodied flavor. Um, anyway, let's bring this tangent back to bottle pricing, just a
yes.
little bit. And I'm probably going to do something dangerous now and give people rationalizations for buying things that are more expensive on occasion. However, as a whiskey lover, I would like to enable people to feel better about the luxury purchase category. So my personal math, um, I think, did I just get a Discord notification? That probably came through on the stream. Oh well. Um, my
I
personal
didn't hear.
math, okay. My personal math for, um, well, I guess we've all done this at some point. How much does it cost per pour of a bottle? And when you're in the $20 bottle range, you just don't care.
Yeah,
When you
I
get
mean,
up
it
to
doesn't
the
matter.
mid-price, mid-shelf, oh, actually, before I get into this whole diatribe, Let's talk a little bit about bottom shelf versus mid shelf versus top shelf. So bottom shelf is, or let's say well whiskey is even a lower tier than that.
Yeah.
Um,
That's like Old Crow. Um, and Old Crow is at the upper end of the well tier, mind you. But that's, like Aristocrat, Old Crow. I mean, the stuff that you go in and yeah, it says bourbon, but it's $10 a bottle.
yep. Yeah. So first of all, well whiskey, great for a bar. I highly recommend against buying a well whiskey for your home. Their versatility is limited. Um, and in a lot of cases, they don't taste that good, especially if you're going neat or on the rocks. Well liquors, well whiskey in particular, are meant to taste broadly like whiskey when buried in a cocktail. They are meant to be the cheapest liquor option in that category at the bar. They buy them in bulk, they get wholesale prices, but more critically, at a bar, you will find the markup on these items is incredible. Um, and I mean that in a bad way. When you're talking of
Oh
like
yeah.
if you order a shot of well whiskey, you're doing yourself a disservice in terms of the value for your money. Some people want to like let's say a shot of well whiskey is $5, um, but a shot of Jim Beam is $7 maybe, right? And Beam is not an expensive bottle. That $7 is paying for roughly half the bottle in a single shot.
Yeah.
There's a reason
So
for
in the
that.
Commonwealth of Virginia, a bottle of Jim Beam, 750 bottle of Jim Beam will be roughly $16.97.
There you go. And you've got a price menu because it's an ABC government controlled uh what do you call it? ABC is a government controlled liquor sales.
Yeah, they are retail control.
Right. There you go. So the good thing about living in a state like that is you always know what you're going to pay for a bottle of whatever, no matter where you go. The downside to that is they have to have an entry in their menu for anything that they sell anywhere in the state, which means that your options are more limited. But that's probably a deeper topic for another time, or maybe that's all we need to
Yeah.
say about it. But
Yeah,
so the
for
thing,
now I think that's a good.
yeah, the thing about bar prices is that you have to remember you're paying for your server's time. You're paying for, let's say, when you go to a restaurant or you go to a bar, think of that seat that you're sitting in as something that you're renting, and the stuff that you're buying is paying the rent. So if you're going to sit at a bar chatting with your friends for 3 hours, you're relatively expected to be buying some drinks during that time, and you are paying the rent on that chair, and you are paying for your bartender's time. So no matter what you order, there's going to be some costs built in terms of that time. So when you go and order a shot of well whiskey, there's a certain expectation of how long you will take to finish that, and they price it accordingly. There's a fixed cost that just gets added to everything. So if you go into a bar and you're trying to get from point A to point B, as we sometimes say, not to drink responsibly, right? Not to encourage
Yes.
irresponsible drinking, but that is definitely some reason that people go into bars is to feel a certain way in a certain amount of time. And sometimes you want to do that for as little money as possible. That's what the well whiskey is for. Don't buy it for your home. It's not worth it. Uh, and also just be aware that you're paying tons of markup at the bar. Now, at the bar, I usually consider Jim Beam as an upgrade, right? If I'm at a bar, I'll ask what their well is. If it's something that I know I don't like, I'm not going to name names. But the well whiskeys are generally not like household names necessarily. They're usually the real cheap stuff.
Yeah.
So, like you were saying, Old Crow is considered a cheap whiskey, but that is on the high end of well whiskey. A lot of times I'll
And
ask what the well is. I don't even recognize the name.
I have been in bars where the well is Old Crow. I've been in bars where the well is JTS Brown. I've been to a bar, a single bar, where their well whiskey was, well, it depends on what we could get cheapest this month.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole thing. For the bar, the well whiskey is the cheapest thing that they can get. It may not be the cheapest whiskey on the market because it depends on their wholesale relationships, their distributor relationships, right? You're not necessarily going to be able to predict that. And a lot of times that whiskey is borderline swill. And the
Oh
point
yeah.
is when you bury it in a cocktail, you're going to taste the fact that it tastes like a barrel aged spirit. And that's really all they're going for. And that's fine. Because when you're ordering a well whiskey, you're often just trying to get from point A to point B, or you're at this bar on the way to a show or something like that, You just want to have a drink. You're not interested necessarily in how it tastes. This is very different, by the way, from when you go into a bar and they have a specialty menu. The default option for a lot of those cocktails is going to be a named whiskey, which means that they're not doing the well whiskey, right? And on those ones, they've already priced in the cost of the cocktail, the cost of that nicer upgrade whiskey. You can upgrade from there if you want. If they have a specialty old fashioned and they've named a whiskey and you know it's a nicer whiskey, but you know that you don't particularly like that whiskey, you can also request an upgrade or an exchange for a whiskey that you do like, and that might cost you an extra dollar or two. But if you know your
Yeah.
palate, that can be worth it. So
And
that's well and bottom tier whiskey, let's say.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Uh, and I was going to say a lot of times when you are getting, say, oh, it doesn't specify on the menu what they use for this drink. If I ask for a call brand, which is, a call brand is a brand that customers ask for by name. Um, the markup for that is negligible for me. That's like a dollar or two, sometimes a little bit more depending on how big the jump is. But if I go into a bar and go, I'd like uh, a sour with Knob Creek, that goes from being a $8-9 drink to maybe 10-12.
Yeah. And it's always going to depend on how many cocktails you drink, how often you go out to eat. We're talking about restaurant cocktails. They can be on the pricey side, maybe starting at $10. It depends on, it's always going to depend on how
Mhm.
fancy of a place you go. But typically, if they have a cocktail bar to go with, say, your steak or something, you're going to be starting somewhere in the tens. Yeah, it gets pricey. And so when you go to a restaurant like that, and the prices, I mean, I look at it this way. The price is an indication to me, a reminder, drink responsibly. I don't need to be having
Yes.
3 cocktails with my steak. I, knowing myself, if I get one glass of wine, that's going to last me the whole dinner. Similarly, if I get a cocktail, if I order a cocktail at appetizer time, I'm not going to be done with it by the time we're done eating because once the food comes, I'm focused on the food. Cocktail pairings are a thing. Sometimes it works really well. Sometimes your cocktail and your entree clash, and then you just kind of end up forgetting about your cocktail. My instinct in that instance is not to throw back the cocktail and order a different one. My instinct is to set it aside and drink it after dinner as an interlude between dinner and dessert, or just as a before I pay the check or something like that. Um, so that's all part of drinking responsibly saves you money.
Mhm.
Um, so if as long as we're talking about markup, the well whiskey is going to be marked up
Yes.
crazy, right? They're paying $8 a liter or something like that for the well whiskey, and they're charging you $6 a shot. You're paying for the entire bottle every time you order a shot, more or less. Um, let me close my door real quick. Uh,
Yep. Well, and while he's doing that, there are also like not exactly loopholes, but areas where you can not exactly save money, but get a much nicer experience for not a whole lot more. And that not a whole lot more really is not a whole lot more. A dollar or two does a mile of difference because, you're going from something that I wouldn't personally drink neat, and I drank Old Crow neat, to something that I'd be happy to pour for one of my friends. And that is all the difference in the world. Their markup on those call brands is smaller, or their profit on the call brands is slightly smaller, which is why they don't typically ask if you want, a certain brand. In some bars, the markup on those call brands will be a little bit higher, and the prices for cocktails made with call brands will be a little bit higher. And you see it you go someplace and you say, you walk up and you ask for, say, um, a martini. And trust me, you don't want a martini with the well gin. But they will ask you, do you have a gin preference? Tanqueray, Beefeater, Bombay, and typically they have two or three, sort of. standard step up from well, maybe mid-shelf gins, and a couple of really nice ones. And the mid-shelf is where the best value will be in terms of bang for buck. And the uh, the upper shelf and the well will be the worst. You've got sort of a bell curve um, of sort
Value.
of markup, I guess.
Yeah.
Or-
Okay, yeah. I think it depends. Top shelf stuff gets really weird. Like
It does,
there's no
but that's
ceiling
just
on
been my
prices for some things.
experience.
Um,
Yes,
but that's also true in buying whiskey. The stuff that's really hard to
yes,
find, if you find it at an auction, for example, like a legal auction, like you go to an auction in the UK or something like that. There are some auctions in the US, but I think it's legally more of a gray area. Um,
and
so
a
something like
lot of
the
times you've
auction
got to have
house.
a certain license.
Yeah, I think what ends up happening is the auction house would have to buy it off a private collector. There's some tax paperwork to file, and then the auction house is directly selling the spirit. Whereas in the UK, um, I think more or less the way it works is that the bottle is yours until it's sold, and the auction house is facilitating a sale. Um,
Mhm.
and then you can get it shipped from the UK to the US, and they pay import duties and so on. Um, but that's a whole thing. Once you get into paying for rare, hard to find, expensive stuff, you might be looking at auctions, and then the price that you pay is the price that you're willing to pay, more or less, especially if you're bidding against somebody else. Uh, but like, let's stay away from that tier of like the unobtainables. And
Yes,
I think we can reasonably talk about the kind of stuff that you're going to find off the shelf in your liquor store for your home bar, and kind of keep it constrained to that. Because hunting rare whiskey
that's fair.
is not something that I necessarily want to encourage. I think
No,
there's a
and
lot better use of your time just looking for good value in the stuff that's easy to find.
like I I've been guilty of going, well, I want to try a whiskey that's older than I am. I've got the money to splurge on it. Why not? And so
Yeah.
I do dumb things like this.
What is that, by the way? 42 year
This
old.
is the Gervin distilled May 1979, bottled November 2021, uh, from a aged in a single cask.
Nice.
Um, it's
Yeah.
actually really interesting stuff. I definitely overpaid for it.
And you don't have to say what you paid. I think
No,
I will
up to
end
you.
up justifying in the rest of this conversation that the occasional splurge like that is acceptable as long as your budget supports it, and
Yeah,
there's good reasons to, or there's good justifications for making
yeah,
such purchases. I've bought some things that are birthier, right? Which because they are, because I'm in my 30s, birthier stuff is now in that officially expensive range, being over 30 years old.
hmm,
Um, so if you start going for birthier stuff beyond a certain age, it ends up getting expensive. Treat yourself, exactly, exactly. David has put his finger on it, hit the nail on the head.
hmm,
The refrain of this ultimately is treat yourself. Um, I think we're on a good roll with this topic. I'm gonna keep exploring bar prices for a moment.
hmm,
So we've talked about well whiskey. It's pure markup. It's you walk into a bar and you want to spend as few dollars as possible to get a serving of alcohol. That's what well whiskey is for. Bottom shelf whiskey is going to be your really common call brands like your Tanqueray gin. Um, that is not super expensive, doesn't cost a whole lot to upgrade over the well. The markup on those tends to be, instead of paying for the whole bottle per serving, you're paying for half to a third of the bottle per serving. And these are going to be bottles, if you bought them in the shelf off the store, would be around 20 bucks, right? We're out of the single digit price and into the teens and low 20s for, I think low 20s for most people would be considered mid shelf. But the ceiling is so high, I feel a little weird about that. I think that the sort of common call brands that people are going to want to actually get that are sort of what I would consider bottom shelf in that sort of up to low 20s. And then you've got your mid shelf, which let's just say broadly is mid 20s to mid 40s in price per bottle. And typically for those, if you're ordering at a bar or in a cocktail, yeah, there's your Beefeater. What is that one?
This is the Beefeater 24, which is like a little bit more.
Okay. So we might call that like a borderline mid shelf.
Yeah.
So if you find a brand that you like, sometimes you want to upgrade within the brand. That's a great way to upgrade and explore upgrades. Um, so we get to mid shelf stuff, and we're talking about these are going to be mid shelf has sort of two qualities. One is the price of the bottle. The other is how common it is. A lot of your common mid shelfers are going to be at most bars. So you can feel free to walk into a bar and try something, a bar with a good stock, a good selection, range of options. Um, and your markup on the mid shelf stuff is typically going to be you're paying about a third to about a quarter to a fifth of the bottle per serving. And that's sort of, I would say your mid shelf is pretty much where you want to stop with cocktails, unless you only like your drinks with cocktails and you really you want to do a spirit forward cocktail of something high shelf, some top shelf. Um, and I would say the top shelf, the premium brand stuff, is above that mid 40s price point up into the sky's the limit.
Mhm.
Hundreds of dollars per bottle, I would say. You even relatively common top shelf stuff like Octomore. Um,
Oh yeah.
Octomore you can find everywhere is definitely a top shelf product. Definitely goes for anywhere from 200 to 400 euros per bottle. The cool thing about that level, that $200 bottle area of top shelf stuff is you can usually find pretty good deals on the so-called super premium but common whiskey
Mhm.
because you're going to end up paying maybe a sixth to an eighth or even a tenth of the
Yeah.
bottle price. Because again, we're diluting those fixed costs now. As the bottle price goes up,
Yeah.
the bartender's time and your spot at the bar cost less relative to what you're drinking. And the bottle prices, the deals as it goes are priced accordingly to that. And something like Octomore is relatively hard to find. You don't necessarily walk into a liquor store and buy it, but almost every bar that specializes in whiskey is going to have some.
Yes.
Um,
Now whiskey bars are a little bit different, I think,
yeah.
because you go into, say, a nice steak restaurant, and they've got a premium or super premium bottle on the wall that they're willing to pour you or put in a cocktail for you. You are looking at a markup that is higher there than at a whiskey bar, because part of what you're paying for in the case of that like nice steak restaurant is that that bottle is going to probably sit there longer than at the whiskey bar, because not everybody who goes to a good steak restaurant is going to go, oh yeah, I want some Octomore with my steak. But you walk into a whiskey bar and you are more likely to have two or three people a night who go, ooh, they've got Octomore. I want to have some of that.
Yep, a friend of ours who's involved in the production side of this podcast, in theory, eventually, right? He's busy right now.
Yes.
A friend of ours walked into a whiskey bar called the Whiskey Bar, of all things, and
Yeah.
ordered, which is a really good bar, by the way. We went there together. And he ordered an Ardbeg Supernova, which is a release from a long time ago, relatively hard to find, definitely expensive. It's one of those super heavily peated,
Hmm.
very specialty whiskeys, and paid what he thought was kind of an embarrassing amount for that serving. Uh, but that's a bottle you can't buy.
Yeah.
Good evening, Genji. Thanks for
Hello.
joining. So he paid what he felt was, I mean, like he paid, let's say, the price of a reasonably good bottle of whiskey for a single serving of that.
Hmm.
But he got to try something he otherwise would not have been able to try, and he didn't have to go out of his way to find it at auction and pay a ridiculous price for a whole bottle. Oftentimes with whiskeys like that, a single try is more than enough to satisfy your interest.
Oh, yeah.
Which again, I come back to, don't be like us and build up a collection of more whiskey than you could possibly drink responsibly in your life. Uh, that's just not a responsible use of your money if you're a typical average consumer. Now, Phill and I, as whiskey writers and enthusiasts and admins of a whiskey online community, have slightly more justification here. But let's be honest, to some
There is.
extent, we're rationalizing, right? We've made
Oh yeah.
decisions. We've made decisions
Yes.
that we want to justify at some level. Um, yeah,
And not everybody really has the drive to try everything that they see. Like I I frequently, show up to D&D night with a couple bottles of whiskey that I want to share with people because they're cool to me. And frequently I'm one of like two people who drinks any of it because for them, even with no like money invested, don't really have the drive or interest to go, oh, 16-year-old Daluin. Cool. I'll try that. Because that's just not something that's really, in their scope.
yeah. I'm going to pivot this topic a little bit now because we've talked about kind of everything from well to top shelf whiskey at a specialty whiskey bar. If you're buying at bars, now with all that justification out of the way, we've been talking about you're paying for a fraction of the bottle, which is significantly more than the fraction of bottle that the liquid represents. Whenever you buy a whiskey at a bar, and sometimes there's a great reason for that, satisfy your curiosity without spending on the whole bottle. Try something you would otherwise not be able to try. Um, just because you're out, right? I can make coffee myself at home. That doesn't stop me from going to Starbucks every other week to get something that they make that I don't want to make for myself. Like um, they've got this cream thing now, and they've got this olive oil coffee, which is kind of weird, but like I'll try that once. Putting the pistachio foam cold brew, that's real good. I definitely can't make that
Hmm.
myself. It's always worth going out to a specialty place and like not just Starbucks, right? Support your local coffee roasters. We've talked about
Yeah.
that before. If you're going for something where the beans are the focus and the preparation is standard, like just a latte with excellent espresso, go to your local coffee roaster. If you want dessert that is coffee flavored, go to Starbucks. Neither of those types of things I'm necessarily going to be able to make myself at home. This is akin to getting a cocktail at a bar, right? Some cocktails you can make, like I can make a latte for myself at home. Generally, I think they're pretty good, better than most coffee houses, but not specialty roasters coffee houses lattes. They know how to optimally use their ingredient. Um, so if you consider the bar, the cocktail, and the coffee house, the latte, and I'm going to torture this analogy. So buckle up. Um, uh, Coffee, I think, is something that a lot more people can relate to than whiskey. A lot more people drink coffee on a regular basis. Whiskey, for a lot of people, I think, is a special occasion thing. And that's actually exactly what I want to justify. Most people buy a bottle of whiskey and sit on it for years. I used to be that way. I bought like an $80 bottle of whiskey and it lasted me 4 or 5 years. And that bottle of whiskey ended up being worth a lot more because they stopped making it. But that doesn't matter at all. I got to brag on the fact that like, oh, sure, I've owned a bottle of what is now a $300 whiskey. It only cost me $80, and I enjoyed it. $80 worth. I feel bad for you who paid
Yeah.
$300 for that bottle.
Yeah. That's the other thing. The other side of that coin is sometimes the price that you're willing to pay for something you regret because, oh, this isn't the experience that I had hoped for.
Yes,
And you can avoid that by not buying a whole bottle of it.
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And sometimes your experiences around it, like you visited the distillery, you learned some things you thought were cool. You have this bottle now, and like part of it is it's a souvenir, and you
Yeah.
drink it and enjoy it as a souvenir. But just as much, you leave it on the shelf and enjoy it being there as a souvenir, right? And you
Mhm.
revisit it occasionally, but it's a special occasion thing. And most people have no need for, they'll have a cocktail whiskey and a special occasion whiskey. I think that's a pretty normal thing.
You know,
You're,
I
yeah,
paid a lot of money for this to share it with a bunch of friends. And now when I open it, I think of the friends that I shared it with on Burns night.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's
absolutely. You build the memories around the bottle, and that's a big part of the value of it. Back on the coffee analogy. Um,
yes, sorry.
so a lot of people will, let's say just to make a straw man argument here. People will regularly go to Starbucks at whatever cadence their budget supports. for instance, or another coffee house, whatever. And let's say you pay $5 for a latte, which in the case of some coffee houses is on the low side. In the case of some coffee houses is going to be on the high side. Let's say you pay $5 for a specialty coffee, latte, whatever. My preference is a latte. Or sometimes a cappuccino. I like getting a cappuccino at an Italian restaurant as it goes along with dessert. Um, be that as it may. Um, some people will regularly go get coffee. The first thing that you essentially get told if you're trying to budget, if you're trying to improve your budget, the first thing people will tell you is like, hey, you know that luxury purchase you're making for a daily vice, drinking your coffee? Maybe you should learn to make good coffee at home. Buy good beans. Good beans to brew at home cost less than bad beans made into a specialty drink at a coffee shop by a long shot, right? I, for instance, pay $20 for a bag of beans that lasts me 2 weeks, which is, the equivalent of 3 or 4 lattes from Starbucks or specialty drinks, whatever. They cost $6,
Yeah.
$7, whatever. Uh, so I get a lot more utility out of that expensive bean that I took home and made myself. Uh, and that is exactly the analogy that I want to make with good whiskey. If you're treating yourself to something like, even if you're drinking whiskey 3 times a week, which is typically my pattern, um, you think about the cost that you're replacing, right? If instead of going to a cocktail bar, you can learn to make a decent cocktail. Like let's say that an old fashioned is the equivalent of a latte. Pretty basic cocktail. You don't need a real specialty bartender to make it to do a good job at it. You can do it yourself. You can save the fancier cocktails for when you go out. Make yourself an old fashioned at home. Find a good whiskey to go in your old fashioned and make it however often you're going to make it, once a week, whatever. And you will find the price of that bottle of whiskey ends up giving you a lot more enjoyment for less money. And it didn't take that much. You had to figure out your preferences maybe a little bit. You had to learn how to make an old fashioned, which is kind of a fun thing to do. But ultimately, like you've ended up saving money. Um, and you might even be getting better drinks out of it. You bought a better bottle of whiskey than they'd be using at the bar. So let's do some quick math. I would say I
Bad at that.
pour I pour about 15 to 20 milliliters or half an ounce ish of whiskey when I'm having something that I bought that's expensive, and that's more than enough. Um, that basically means that I'm getting 35 to 40 servings out of a nice expensive bottle. If I say I'm willing to, a couple times a week, spend $5 on my dessert, um, and like this is again like we are whiskey enthusiasts. So the fact that I drink expensive whiskey on a regular basis once a week, something like that, um, even if you replace this with you have it once a month or you have it at a holiday a couple times a year or something like that. Let's say you're willing to spend $5 on a serving of nice whiskey, or let's say you're willing to spend $10 on a serving of nice whiskey for your whole friends and family that are gathered for a holiday or something like that, and you're going to get 30 servings out of a bottle, something like that. At $10 a serving, 30 servings per bottle, you've got a $300 bottle there. Are you willing to spend $10 a serving? Maybe. Are you willing to spend $5 a serving? Maybe. And then you're at a $150 bottle. Um, but really, I guess what I'm trying to do here is to justify or allow you to rationalize that your treat yourself whiskey can probably be more expensive than you think. Come back to that $20 bottle of wine, $60 to $80 bottle of whiskey, $50 bottle of wine, $150 to $200 bottle of whiskey, right? And there's a lot of really good whiskey to be had in that $80 to $150 range. That for me is the sweet spot of value. What you pointing at? It's a little small in the
Oh,
video.
the Offerman edition,
Ah, yes, that's a real good one.
uh, full volume, which is $100.
Yep,
Most of my expensive stuff is up out of frame,
top shelf.
unfortunately.
Yeah, for me,
Yeah.
I always felt like at a bar, top shelf makes sense. You want to show off your really fancy stuff, make people see it and go like, hey, I want to try that. Ignore the stuff that I got recently that's behind me. I haven't organized and put away, but in the cabinets behind me, my more expensive stuff is typically closer to the floor. Why? I don't want it to fall. I don't want it to fall and break. It's a much more expensive mistake to drop an expensive bottle of whiskey than a cheap one. So my cheap bottles actually end up more towards the top of the cabinets. Uh, don't let top shelf be a label that you feel you have to live up to.
Yeah, I filled from the floor up, and the boxes that were on the top were the inexpensive stuff and liqueurs, and then I just sort of filled in as I went. Um,
Yeah, that's the other
I
way to do it.
definitely don't have another shelf across the room full of stuff.
Yeah, definitely not. Neither do I. Okay, I think we've tortured the coffee analogy to death, but I think if I could leave you with the
Yeah.
takeaway, think about what $5 worth of whiskey is to you, and think about what that ends up adding up to when you're thinking about buying a bottle once a year. Because that treat yourself, maybe a bigger treat yourself than you have been doing so far. And there's really good stuff to find
Oh yeah.
if you pay a little bit more. Um,
And and if you're willing to go a little bit off the beaten path, there are some incredible things being produced
yep.
that just will blow you away.
And that brings us to the nice Whiskey Lodge plug. I'm gonna have
Yes.
the bot tell you the link. If you want to join the Whiskey Lodge and talk about whiskey and learn from the people like us who have unreasonably sized collections, you should join us at the Whiskey Lodge because we would love to help you find a good whiskey for you without you having to spend all of the money that it takes to do all of this curiosity we've been talking about. We've done the research, and the whole point of it was to help other people find stuff. We love
Yes.
to help people find stuff. When you're going off the beaten path, especially if you say, I want to try something off the beaten path, the best thing you can do is ask an expert. And we are happy to be that for you.
And like if you, say, you know, want to find something that fits, oh, I really like these four whiskeys, and I'm looking for like a nice splurge. We can help you with that.
That's right. We do that all the time.
Because
Actually, funny enough, I feel like we've done that a lot less often recently. That used to be all the time.
yeah,
I maybe what it is people tend to come in around the holidays looking for
yeah,
gift ideas, and so we are
yeah.
well outside of the holiday season right now, so it's been a little quiet.
I mean, yeah, we've also been doing a lot of people coming in looking to really get their feet wet and get started, and we've got basically pinned messages in general with recommendations from various long-standing members who have compiled, sort of a basic intro to various categories, um, which probably needs updating. We should probably look into that again.
Yeah, last time I
Maybe
looked at those pins, I think they're about 2 years old. And honestly, our answers to those questions have not necessarily changed because the staples are the
no.
staples.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fair.
But it's worth revisiting every now and then, and also having the pin be a little more fresh because we tend to pin memes and whatever else
Making
seems
fun of
funny.
Skip.
Yeah, we like to that's such a common topic. Um, Not even I visited Joe and Alex at Big Gin today. They were doing a little work. And the topic of making fun of Skip came up even then. And a lot of it was like he's just so open to being made fun of. Like we're like, "Hey, was that okay?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "No, keep bringing it on. Like it's so funny. Like who are you gonna laugh at if you can't laugh at yourself?" You know? And he
Yeah.
he definitely loves bringing the shenanigans.
Yes. And I think that he does his own fair share of putting points on the board.
Yep. We've got sort of personalities that we lean into sometimes on the lodge where uh, you like something in particular, you don't like something else in particular, and now you are Phill is the rye guy, but Phill has varied interests. I am the American single malt guy.
Yeah.
I also have varied interests. Skip is the I hate anything that's peated guy, which
Yes.
isn't even 100% true, but he doesn't like to admit that. And as
Yeah. Oh yeah.
shenanigans for that, we pinned to General anytime he said something good about peated whiskey,
Yes. Oh,
just to remind
he
him.
he also may or may not have the Lord of Lefroy role and the Cult of Ardbeg role.
I think he probably noticed that by now, and we left it for
Oh
fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
He also at one point had the France role.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Remember that one.
Oh yeah, sort of, you know, poking fun at him, giving him random roles is kind of fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes we just see how long it takes him to notice.
and occasionally somebody will give me a random role. It hasn't happened in a while.
I feel like
Um,
the only people that can do that are the server owner and maybe one other person, because I think you can't give roles to anyone who's above you on the role chain.
oh, so that was probably either you or Joe. Interesting.
Like honestly, I haven't done any role shenanigans in a while, so I could not recall a particular instance, but it is entirely possible that I did something.
So, I would like to take this opportunity, if it's okay with you,
Yeah.
to plug something that I'm doing. Um, this Saturday, I'm going to be releasing the first round brackets for the Virginia Whiskey tournament to determine it was basically a popularity contest, but to determine the champion of Virginia whiskey. Last year's winner was Falls Church Distillery or Falls Church Distillers. Um, Great folks. I got to present it to them as they opened a new facility. I got to meet uh, Michael and Lorenzo. They're great people. They make some interesting whiskey. Um, and this year we're doing it a little bit bigger and a little bit better. Um, and I'm probably going to be posting about it in the lodge a lot because I'm running it all summer. The first round polls are going to be lasting a whole week each. Running two sets every week, and they start on June 4th, I think, the first Monday in June. And I'm going to be sort of building it up starting this coming Saturday. So, yeah, keep an eye out. I'm going to be plugging it shamelessly because it's something that I find like really cool and a great way to promote craft distilling in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
So that's on Twitter, right?
I'm running it on Twitter, on Facebook, and I'm going to be funneling engagement from Instagram and Discord into Facebook and Twitter.
And you are using the Rangers Respite channel for that, right?
Yes.
Which I can't find. Oh, is that it? No. Is it the Rangers Respite?
I don't remember. I will actually find out and
Or is it Drinking
because I'm
Geeks?
gonna be doing some videos on it because
I think it might be Drinking Geeks.
oh, on Twitter it's the Drinking Geeks, yes.
There you go. Okay, so I'm going to put that in our chat here for anybody who is interested in voting on these things. Did I fail to copy? Paste.
But
There we go.
I'm also going to try my best to acquire a bottle for from the winning distillery from each batch on round one. Uh, because I do not have a bottle of whiskey from every whiskey producing distillery in the Commonwealth of Virginia. There are 44 of them.
I learned something funny. Maybe I'll publish the audio of this. Caitlin Bartlemay of Clear Creek Distilling did a presentation uh, at the Seattle Cocktail Week a couple months ago,
Ooh,
where she talked about how they had some brandy that someone in a university somewhere, and I think it was Michigan, messaged a bunch of distilleries and said, "Hey, we're running the International Brandy Championship, blah blah blah, whatever," and asked for entries to this. And they were at Clear Creek. They were more than happy to send a bottle or two along. Um, they didn't even check if this was legitimate. They just assumed, some guys in a college dorm were looking for free booze. Sure, whatever, distillery samples, why not? It turned out that it actually was, in fact, a legitimate competition, the International Brandy, um, and apparently they won and they kept winning. every year, to the point where they said the competition was like, look, you keep winning, you can't enter anymore. You are now the judging standard. And the point of that was more that I think distilleries are more open than we realize to to put their products in front of some kind of media. This is not necessarily advice for the listeners, and maybe, maybe I should cut this actually, because the sort of the industry adjacent secret that we're in is that actually we can occasionally get free samples, um, just because we more or less promise to talk about it in a public space, and that helps drive brand awareness and sales, and that's what they're about.
Yes. And that is, part of the purpose of the Virginia Whiskey Championship is because if I can basically sell three people on trying a whiskey from Virginia, that is a win because Virginia is the birthplace of American distilling. It is the birthplace of American whiskey. And it does not get a fair shake on the global stage or even the national stage for the amount of distilling history that has its roots here in Virginia. And also, I love a lot of the products that are produced by Virginia distilleries.
I
So
have
there is that too.
had two or three, and I have to say I agree with that. Virginia makes some really good whiskey. Lots of people love to pay attention to only Kentucky.
Hmm.
A certain mod of the Whiskey Lodge comes to mind.
Yeah,
Um,
we can skip talking about him though, right?
yeah, that's right. Uh, um, yeah, try stuff from different places. Honestly, this is the other half of the soapbox. Vary yourself because you may find if you keep buying whiskey in the same style from the same place, they're all pretty much going to taste the same. There's a lot of variety, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of variety in the options available, and region and climate are actually a big factor that we didn't even talk about because when you've decided to put
Mhm.
a distillery somewhere, there's really nothing you can do about where you are. Um, but that initial choice does have an impact. And that's actually one of the reasons I'm so excited for American single malt because we have a big country with a lot of different climates, and we're already seeing stuff from the coast. We're seeing stuff from the desert. We're seeing stuff from the really hot and humid parts of the South, like in Texas. Um, just all over. There's so many different climates.
I am patiently waiting for a distillery in Appalachia, preferably Virginia because I love Virginia, to produce a pot stilled American single malt aged in an Oloroso cask in a dunnage style warehouse because the Appalachian Mountains are the same mountain range as the ones in Scotland. And I think that'd be a really
Oh,
cool parallel to try.
that's a really good point. There's your Pangea geography lesson of the day.
I'm
Yeah,
a nerd, and I
yeah.
I think that'd be a really cool, like, just just to see.
That is a really good point. I'm suddenly just you saying that I'm suddenly very excited to whatever like everything that you just said. That's a tall order there. American
It
single
is.
malt aged in Oloroso cask in a Dunnage style warehouse, but not as strange as you might think. Other than the fact that there's not a whole lot of Dunnage style warehouses in the U.S. that I know of so far. There are some.
I I don't know that anybody uses them. I think that there's a place in Texas who does, but that's merely because that's using the earth as a basically as a giant heat sink
Yeah, trying to control the
to sort of
temperature swings a
knock
little
some of
more.
the
Yeah,
yeah.
because your whiskey ages real fast in Texas because of getting slurped up into the barrels and then pushed back out by those dramatic temperature swings day to night, season to season. Yep. We've gone off on a tangent significantly now that well, first of all, it is 7:30. We've been going for an hour 15 roughly. We could call it
Roughly.
here, or we could actually get into that poll that I did earlier this week, which is the other topic that
Oh,
happened in the lodge.
Yeah, we should talk about that because if we don't, we might forget about it.
That's fair. I also had the opportunity to ask some producers how they felt about that.
Ooh.
Um, of course, like I mentioned, I visited Joe um, and Alex at Big Chin, and we got to talking about a few things, including this poll, which I thought was interesting, and I felt they might be interested to know the results because they are some of the exemplars of industry people going into a public social space and engaging organically with the community to the extent that we didn't even know they were producers. They never peddled their wares. They didn't necessarily make a big deal about, hey, I make so and so, and therefore I should have more clout here. Nothing like that. Um,
No, I think how we found out that Joe made whiskey was somebody posted a picture of a bottle of McCarthy's and asked if anybody had heard about it. I could be wrong, but I think that's how we figured that out. Now I want to ask Joe if he remembers how.
I think my wife just tried to drop the dog off in the room with me.
Oh dear.
I don't know. I don't know if she actually ended up staying or not. I think she walked back out. Sorry, what were you
What-
saying? You asked Joe what?
Um, I I want to ask Joe if he remembers how the topic of him being a distiller came up because I have a vague memory of somebody posting a picture of a bottle of McCarthy's and asking if anybody knew anything about it, and him going, "Oh, hey, I made that." Um, but I also feel like there was a question in distilling, and he mentioned something about, "Oh, I've done a little bit of distilling," and posted a picture of the stills at Clear Creek. So I don't know for sure
It
how
came up
we.
organically in a few places. That's my recollection as well. He never like showed up in general and was like, "Hey, I'm head distiller of Clear Creek Distilling. I make McCarthy's." Like he didn't do any sort of such introduction. He was like, "I'm a guy who likes whiskey just like the rest of you." And he
Yes,
acted like, I mean, he didn't like announce himself as such. Like you know, you don't walk into a room and be like, "Here's my identity," right? Like you just show up and start participating, right? And he was a
yeah,
guy who liked whiskey like the rest of us. He has a cute bunny. Um, we talk about a lot of random stuff in the Whiskey Lodge. Actually, we were having a debate about that a couple of days ago about how there has always been this war in Discord between the people who think that channels should be extremely topic specific and people who
yes,
think it's fine if we go off on tangents. And in the Whiskey Lodge, we like going off on tangents. We'll start talking about one thing. It's probably in the right channel. By the end of the conversation, that conversation probably belonged in a different channel. But like switching channels is hard, and like who wants to do that? It's fine if the conversation is continuing. Somebody shows up and wants to have a different conversation. Okay, then we'll move the conversation somewhere else so that we're
yeah,
allowing activity to proceed normally. But like, who wants to police where conversations happen, right? Like
yeah,
we as mods in the Whiskey Lodge are there to make sure that everybody's respectful and that everybody's safe.
yeah. And the respectful and the safe parts are really the most important. Um, we occasionally have to be like, "Hey guys, let's move this conversation out of, pour me another." Um, like, uh, or no, I forget where it was. There was a conversation about independent bottlers that happened somewhere, and I gently suggested that it be taken to general. That way, more people could see it because it was a cool discussion, and then it just sort of died out.
Yeah,
But
switching
that's
channels tends to kill conversations unless you're really
yeah,
committed to it. As soon as you have to as soon as you have to change channels, you're just like, is it really that important? Right? That's one of the reasons we
yeah,
don't like asking people to change channels. Like, talk about what you're talking about. It's fine, right?
yeah.
No need to yuck other people's yums.
Um, sorry, we've derailed again,
Oh, completely. Absolutely.
just like
That's what
Norfolk
we do here.
Southern.
Yeah. Uh, I was my recollection of the first time that Joe ever really peddled in any sense, and I wouldn't peddled is wrong. The first time that Joe ever mentioned his own whiskey in the context of this is good is we got on a voice chat and did some video call introductions. It might have been the first time a lot of us saw each other's faces. This is, we
Yeah.
don't do that all that often. We like to do it more, but there's always issues of like when you're showing your face on the internet, a lot of the time you want to trust the people you're showing your face to, right? Doing a YouTube channel like this, obviously, we're saying, well, let's just put our faces out into the world. But
Yeah.
like,
That ship
it's
sailed for me about 10 years ago.
that's true. You've done the YouTube thing for a while. Um, yeah. So on Discord though, like it's understandable that you don't want to just show your face and have like
Mhm.
nobody else has their cameras on, like what's going on there. Or like there's a lot of more pressure with the interactive stuff. So we like to trust each other and we try to have it be sort of a regulars thing. Like when the regulars are around, we'll put the cameras on. Um, if if we have a lot of people we have never seen before, we'll keep the cameras off, whatever. We do a voice chat, talk about what we're drinking, maybe play some games like um, what are they, the Jackbox games. The
Yeah.
sort of stuff that you can play with any number of players from anywhere. Somebody just has to screen share. Um, that's fun stuff. Anyway, Joe popped on and we were asking everybody what they were drinking. And he was like, "Yeah, I'm drinking McCarthy's." And I was like, "Wait, don't you make McCarthy's?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm drinking it because it's good. And also I'm drinking it because I get it for free." Uh, right?
Yeah.
And that was sort of the first context where like he didn't make a big deal about it. Like he waited until we asked what he was drinking, and he said, like he didn't try to make a sales pitch. He just did what everybody else was doing and said, like, "This is what I'm drinking." Um, and I think after that, because I saw how genuinely the producer of this whiskey genuinely enjoyed the product that he made. And then, later on in the conversation, he switched to drinking something else, I think, as we all did.
Yeah.
But from there, I was just like, I really should try this. Like, I like Joe. I like that he likes what he makes, seemingly genuinely, right? Not trying to do a sales pitch, just sitting around hanging with the boys and drinking his own stuff. I'm gonna go to a store and buy some, right? This is the point I want to make here is that this is the kind of organic engagement with an online community that a producer can do and feels great to everybody involved. Like everybody involved in that interaction, it was super charming. And I think that he legitimately ended up selling some whiskey as a result of just being himself on the server.
I
Uh,
mean,
I think that happens a lot, actually.
that's how between him and Caitlin, that's how I ended up, you know, trying McCarthy's for the first time, and then, I really like McCarthy's. Like, it is fantastic whiskey, full stop. Also, Joe and Caitlin are great people, and they make fantastic stuff. I also don't know that I would have ever thought to try Douglas Fir brandy if Caitlin hadn't been like, "Oh yeah, we make this. It's really cool and interesting."
That's all very good points. I will say also, I want to say we were fans of Lost Lantern before Adam joined our server. So that wasn't necessarily sales by way of engagement, but we love being able to give direct feedback to producers,
Yes.
non-distilling producers alike, that we love their stuff. It encourages them, I think we benefit both ways from this relationship. The producers learn from very engaged consumers what they like, what they don't like, what they're interested in. And they sell more product in turn, potentially, right? If it's good, the product has to speak for itself, right? First things first, if you're making especially a luxury product, your product has to speak for itself, right?
Yes.
Next, showing up in an online community as a genuinely likable person and engaging with the community in an organic way is definitely something that we like to see, right? We're geeks. We want to talk to producers. We want our members to be comfortable with the fact that producers exist in our Discord, and we want the producers to feel comfortable interacting with people, right? It's a mutual respect kind of a relationship. Anyway, this is just something that happens in the Whiskey Lodge, and I got this idea I should do a poll. And the poll was something along the lines that I could read the answers, but like to be quite honest, first of all, we surveyed a Discord about a question that says, "Is Discord the best thing for you?" More or less. And of course, selection bias says,
Yeah.
a lot of people feel like Discord is the best thing. Um, so like I think I can paraphrase, and also there weren't that many responses, and the conversation as it does veered off in other directions. So I think that this This theory is slightly reinforced by the opinions of others, but is definitely not statistically significant at this time. I'll report back if it becomes statistically significant.
Hmm.
Um, but essentially, the results of the poll said the question was more along the lines of all of the online communities that you're involved in, or the media that you consume, be it Discord, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever, any online community that you're a part of, which of them have resulted in the most purchases of whiskey or other such products? Um, and no surprise that on Discord, most people were saying the Discord engagement was the thing that made them buy the most stuff. There's a reason that these people hang out. There's a reason that they were there in the server when my survey went by and they responded to it. Definitely selection bias. But the second most was like full length YouTube videos, which is kind of interesting. I
Yeah.
thought that with the prevalence of shorts recently, TikTok, Instagram stories, YouTube shorts, you might see that more people feel like there's something there in terms of buying things. But I think my takeaway from that is that they come across more similar to ads.
So I will say, as someone who had a YouTube presence and made roughly 130 videos about whiskey, including shorts. While the shorts got more views, they got significantly less actual engagement in terms of comments, likes, and uh, general conversation. Um, and there was definitely, I can, in roughly a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I can say, like, hit the high points of something. But there is more depth in this glass than I can get into in a minute.
That is true. You pretty much, I feel like to go into shorts, I haven't done it so much myself. I feel like to get into shorts in anything that resembles a whiskey review, you would have to do the review in advance, make a script, and then try to get it across as if you just had a first impression, because
Hmm.
you want to go for being genuine. But in that
Right.
short-term format, there's not enough time to really have a genuine reaction to something like a whiskey.
Yeah.
A genuine first impression, I mean.
Yeah.
Like even when you go to a distillery and they want you to taste everything that they have, you still spend like 5 minutes on a thing, talking with them about
Yeah.
what it is and what it tastes like and how it relates to other things. There's a lot to go into. It's one of the reasons that we love it. It's a very deep topic, and every expression has its own personality to explore and its own history and its own trade-offs in production and so on. But I guess the result of the poll and the reason I did it in the first place is selfishly, I want to see more producers in the Whiskey Lodge. I think that's a really fun thing. I think it's not as overwhelming necessarily as it feels now. I understand this is your day job, and you don't necessarily want to spend part of your
Yeah.
day job where you could be making products hanging out in a social server. And you probably also don't want to spend your personal time hanging out in a social server related to your job. Some people do, right? Some people really live and breathe whiskey as a day job, and in some of their off hours, they'll also hang out and talk about whiskey. I mean, that comes from loving a thing, right? I'm
Yeah.
not a professional musician, but I do play a fair amount of music, and I definitely do that in my spare time. And I know enough professional musicians to know some of them do it both as a day job, as a full-time thing, and also do it just for fun. They enjoy listening to music, they enjoy playing music, they'll hang out with their friends. They're not making money doing that stuff, and they do it
I
because they
mean,
love it.
I work with someone who, working for the company that I work for is just sort of like, almost a side gig for him because most of where his money comes from is uh, recording music for like Discovery and stuff. And, it's interesting to sort of get his, perspective on things because he is constantly playing music. If if you leave a guitar unattended around him, he will at some point pick it up and start playing because an idea strikes him.
Yeah,
And there's
sometimes
nothing wrong with that. I think it's really interesting because he just breathes music.
yeah, sometimes whiskey producers also just have wild ideas and they'll like, I don't know if this is a thing that I want to do. Let me just run it by the people who like this kind of thing. Like, hey, here's a
Yeah,
wild idea. What do you think of that? And sometimes we'll go like, like it's not that unique. A lot of people like maybe it's something that other people have done, or maybe we don't think it's going to taste very good. But like more often than not, especially because we're geeks, um,
yeah. Ooh, I
they'll
want to
say
try that.
here's a weird idea I just came up, and we're like, yes, please make that. We want to try it, and also that might even be commercially viable. You should do it.
I mean, and we also have a tendency to come up with kind of crazy ideas, not even necessarily tagging the people who make the stuff, but like a couple times we've like come up with a like crazy idea, and then Joe will pop in and burst our bubbles and be like, "That's a bad idea, guys."
Doesn't work, doesn't scale, doesn't
Yeah.
taste good, right? Like they've tried stuff. They've tried stuff that they've never
Oh
released.
yeah.
There's a whole lot of R&D, research and development that goes on in that industry. Um, I will also say the two of us here on this call actually were responsible for a thing that might be happening. It's
Ooh.
definitely not official. You remember what this was. You've got Catoctin Creek, which is a rye that you love,
Ah,
and
yes. Yes.
we have Clear Creek Distillery that makes products that we love. And
Yes.
I had the idea at some point that I was going to put Clear Creek pear brandy in a barrel, a 2 liter barrel that I have next to me that previously held rye whiskey.
Yes.
I wanted to put something in it. I didn't know what I was going to do with a rye cask. And after asking around the internet, people were like, you know what would go well with that? Some kind of brandy. And like not like apple brandy or grape brandy. Like you should pick
Yeah.
something a little more unusual. How about pear brandy? And the only pear brandy I could find anywhere happened to be Clear Creek's. I already knew the brand. Happened to be Clear Creek's
Hmm.
pear brandy. I'd never tried it before. So I blind bought 3 rather expensive bottles of Clear Creek pear brandy to fill up my 2 liter cask here. Um, Turned out I love the brandy. It took me a little while to warm up to it because it's not whiskey. I had to learn how to appreciate it. Brand new thing. Um, and I put it in my cask anyway. I was like, this is happening, whether it's good or not. I'm putting this pear brandy in my rye cask, and we're going to see how it turns out. Um,
Yeah.
2 or 3 months into that aging, I pulled a sample of it, and I drove down to Clear Creek Distillery, and I said, Joe, you have to try this. Right? I brought him his own brandy that I aged in a barrel, um, and he really liked it. I want to say that's when Joe started taking me seriously as a person who dabbles in whiskey as a non-producer, writer, experimentalist, what have you. Um, Maybe before that, but I think that really was like, oh, like this is tasty. And I shouldn't be speaking for Joe, but I'm sure he might confirm once we have him on, which might happen soon. Um, and then at some point on Twitter, somebody could right Catoctin Creek had said something about wanting to do something with a pear brandy finisher. I don't know. I can't even remember what the
So
context was. Maybe you do. Go ahead.
So, the context was I basically harassed the folks at Catoctin Creek and Joe on Twitter to be like, "Hey, you should work together," repeatedly, and got positive responses from both parties.
Oh, that's right. That's right. But
So,
they had never talked to each other.
not on Twitter.
Right.
They were familiar with each other.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Industry folks know each other. But that I think in that context, maybe they hadn't put two and two together. We want to work with barrels from that distillery. We want to work with barrels from the other distillery, right? And then I brought Joe this sample of rye finished Clear Creek pear brandy and said, "Hey, by the way, you know that thing that happened on Twitter where both of you said that you wanted to work with the other with your casks and your liquid? Well, I've just demonstrated that this might be a good idea, and you've demonstrated an interest. Maybe you should do something."
I I
And
did.
I don't think we know for sure if anything has happened there, but we know that there's a positive connection and real interest in doing something with that
Yes.
information.
And I have relayed the message of Joe says hello to the folks at Catoctin Creek. Um and I did offer at some point jokingly that I would mule a barrel across the United States if need be to make it happen. So
And that might
Hey Joe,
even,
I'm still waiting on that phone call.
yeah, right. I think the fun thing about that, because it would be an empty barrel, is
Yes,
that that might actually be perfectly legal if you were
I
to legitimately do it.
I believe it would be. Because empty barrel guaranteed less than 5 gallons of distilled spirit. Um, as long as I wasn't in a vehicle that, if I got pulled over, it would reek of rye whiskey, which I wouldn't mind, but a state trooper might have a different opinion of.
Right. You got to have it in like a U-Haul cab or a U-Haul,
Yeah,
whatever the truck thing is in the back that's separate airspace from the cabin.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, yeah. Anyway, I think I have nowhere to go from there, and we've been going for almost 2 hours, so I think
yeah.
I might want to call it at this point. Um, I have nothing in my glass, so just like last time, I'm gonna have to pour something so we can cheers and sign off. And what
All
I'm
right.
going to pour is my Westward Pinot Noir cask, which
Ooh.
was an actual daily drinker of mine for most of November and December, except for when I had COVID and couldn't taste anything. I just kept coming back to this. I love the sort of the balance of the beeriness and the
Yeah.
sweet wine cask. I think this is an excellent profile for Westward.
I've got the Copper Fox Rye in my
Ooh,
glass currently.
nice.
Um, I've I did I did a fair amount of interesting, very very different things in my glass tonight. Different glasses, mind you. I just I just washed all my glasses. Not all of them, but most of them today.
And I suppose I cannot recall. Um, I may have purchased this bottle myself, but I also, just in the interest of full disclosure, Westward has sent me two sample bottles, two full-sized sample bottles of various whiskeys. This may or may not have been one of them. Um, and I feel like I should disclose the fact that I have gotten a distillery sample. It has nothing to do with the fact that I love this whiskey. Um,
Yeah,
I think that
but it is
this
good.
yeah, I think this
To
is it's definitely not a sponsored podcast. As always, I will say we're sponsored by nobody. We talk about what we love because we love it. And the best thing we can do for the brands we love is give them some airtime so that more people can find them. With that, Phill, it's been a pleasure talking to you as always.
as always,
Cheers. Have a great night.
sláinte.
Sláinte.